leading technology and solution provider for the organizations that design, build, and operate today's infrastructure, Bentley Systems is very familiar with the impact of disruptive technologies. This infrastructure includes the water, power, communications, and transportation systems that we use every day. Many of these we'll travel over or use without even thinking about it. These projects, be it a local hospital or a government-funded mega project, are under the same cost and schedule pressures that we see in many of our IT projects. Because of this, the use of innovative and disruptive technologies is actually absolutely essential to the successful delivery of these projects and their impact on today's society. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for today's panel, Mr. Peter Burris of Forrester.
Okay. First off, can everybody hear me okay? My first job is to stand in the middle of the stage and make sure that I'm not having the... Can you guys see the entire logo behind me? It's supposed to be there the entire time. All right, so my head's in the way, so I have to be careful about that. Always good to check the landscape, and that's basically what I'm going to do for the first 15 or 20 minutes, is provide a landscape where that we can use to talk about cloud services. Because the challenge that we all face is increasingly to not do a better job of understanding the technology, but do a better job of understanding how the technology gets applied. That's the challenge in today's world, is not to invent something new, but to figure out how to drive the change that are associated with whatever the invention is, so people actually utilize and get some capabilities out of it. And so for the next hour, what we're going to do is we're going to use a panel style to basically go over this notion of cloud services for the responsive enterprise. And to do that, I'm going to give you about a 15, maybe 20-minute pitch where I talk about the responsive enterprise. What does it mean to think about the responsive enterprise? What is the responsive enterprise? Most importantly, what's making it so important? What are the conditions and the circumstances that are ensuring that if we don't focus our attention on creating increased responsiveness in our businesses, that we will fail? And so I'm going to spend a fair chunk of time at the beginning of this session talking about that. And then what I'll do is I'll invite up our three esteemed panel members, and we'll have a conversation about cloud services in the context of the responsive enterprise, focusing on, okay, great, what does that mean for us to say we're going to deliver cloud services that have some meaning, have some use, and have some commercial value in the context of the responsive enterprise. Make sense? All right, come on, people. Excellent. So this is a great audience. I'm very happy to be here. I also come from Silicon Valley. I don't have as much to say about Silicon Valley as Randy did. My wife, like many of you, is a partner at a VC firm, which means that I definitely suffer through that male uncertainty of your wife making more money than I do. But what I do at Forrester, very quickly, is I run our CIO services. So in other words, Forrester is a role-based company whose job it is ultimately to, if I can click forward to the next slide, whose job it is to help folks make better decisions about how to, no, let's go back one. There we go. Forrester's job is to help our clients make better decisions regarding how to obsess about their customers so that they can drive their growth. And that's an interesting comment, because for a long time, the role of technology was primarily to automate and transform operations to cut costs. And now we see technology being applied to actually driving growth, increasing profitability, and having a direct and consequential impact on the value of a business. So what I do is I work with our CIO clients, and I have a team of about 8 analysts that work closely with me, and we look at the various technology and people and culture and process and other types of decisions that CIOs have to make to ultimately deliver on the promise of technology within their organization. Now, to get to this notion of the responsive enterprise, I'm going to cover 4 points. The first point I'm going to cover is what Forrester calls the age of the customer. And to give you a quick summary of what that means before I go into a little bit more detail, market power is shifting. Customers hold more cards. Not all the cards, but more cards. And that is the catalyst for the need for the responsive enterprise. Now, how are businesses respond? Well, businesses are responding by identifying ways to increase the density of digital capabilities within their business. Because as assets become more programmable, they become more easy to fit together and reconfigure in new ways. Now, this notion of driving digital differently, because we've been doing digital business for 50 years. I mean, I'm certainly one of the adopters of a lot of the new terminology, but I also have been around long enough to know that, you know, I can go back and have plenty of scars that I carry with me every day of trying to take things that had been done manually or through labor and translate them into some digital mechanism. We think that this is becoming so important, and most importantly, so in front of customers and markets that it requires that we think about an entirely new agenda for the technology universe. We call that the business technology or the BT agenda. And then finally, that's going to lead to two questions that I'll use as a basis for kicking off the panel. Okay, so like I said, when we get to the panel, there'll be plenty of time for questions. If anybody has a burning desire to ask me something during the course of the session, though, feel free to raise your hand, come up to one of the microphones, stop me. We can adjust and reconfigure the session accordingly. So let's start with this notion of the age of the customer and why it shifts focus. Okay, here are the market realities pre-2010. You're a customer, you're standing in front of a set of options. 80% of those options were provided to you or put to you by folks, companies who sell stuff. That's where your option came from. So you looked at your range of doors that you could enter into. The ones most proximate to you, the ones that were most obvious to you, were in fact the options provided by companies. What is the technology? What is the product? How does it work? What's the impact of using it? What's it going to mean to me? The vast majority of the information and the interactions that took place in marketplace were those that were provided by sellers to customers and largely controlled by sellers. Way off in the distance, we might have a fellow customer or an LO customer, as the case may be. And that's the power of word-of-mouth marketing. No question, it was always an extremely powerful way to get your message out, but it was costly, it was unpredictable, it was uncertain. The vast majority of interactions were generated by sellers. Now, in economics or in the military, there is a term called information asymmetry. How many of you have heard the term information asymmetry? Okay? So the way that an economist would talk about information asymmetry is the disparity in the access to information between the buyer and the seller has an enormous impact on the quality of the deal and the exchange gets made. If the seller has an advantage, who do you think gets the better deal, better part of the deal? I hear it kind of. Right. The seller gets the better part of the deal. If the buyer has an information advantage, who gets the better part of the deal? The buyer. One takes the form of profit, and the other one takes the form of what's known as consumer surplus, and ultimately may mean that the sellers go out of business. Also, there's other considerations there as well, of course. Now, in the military, the notion of information asymmetry has become so baked into how we think about things that there's been an enormous amount of research done over the last 20 years about how increasingly warfare is not about the weapons and even the people, it's about the intelligence and the information that's available. So one of the things that I did before I came to Forrester, I was actually CIO for this enormous DARPA project on the role of social media in the military theaters. And watching how smart, young, creative people with their lives on the line and a real sense of urgency, you want to see innovation, you ain't seen nothing like kids that are trying to save themselves and their buddies on the front lines of a military campaign. So this was the market realities pre-2010. Right around 2010, a whole bunch of stuff happened. A whole bunch of brands, including Facebook, one we just heard a lot about, LinkedIn, Twitter, MySpace. All of these other brands started popping up, and it allowed for the basic social graph of commerce to change. The basic mechanisms by which consumers and businesses, because this is also true for B2B, consumers and businesses started to engage to share information, share insights, and share understanding of impacts started to change pretty dramatically. And it was so great that in pre-2010, around the 2008-2009 timeframe, there were roughly around 350 billion consumer impressions, ad impressions in the United States. That's a lot. But people basically became really cognizant of a brand or a brand statement of, 350 billion times in the US. But after 2010, that number jumped to 5.3 trillion. About a 14-fold increase, and 95% of the net new impressions came from social media. That changes everything. And as a consequence, if we boil this all down to a simple concept, this is what the marketplace looks like today. A customer stands in front of groups of buyers who are making statements about what works, what doesn't work, why to buy this, why to buy that, how to use it, how to get returns on it, how to get value out of it. And this is happening in consumer markets, it's happening in business markets, it's happening inside companies itself. Inside companies, our employees, the people that work for us, the people that we serve, are spending an enormous amount of time going back and forth about what's working, what's not working, why is it not working, who's responsible. We could go on and on and on. And it's completely changing the way that we adopt and innovate. And very importantly, it's dramatically altering our business models. And I think Randy just did a great job of identifying some of those changes or some of the mechanisms that are underlying some of these changes. The whole notion of value capture, which has been the same thing for a few hundred years. I mean, I never knew that I could have 10,000 followers on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it was and get a free nice hotel room in Australia. It means maybe my daughter's actually worth something to me. So this is where we are today. So as you leave this room, the first thing to think about is we are in the age of the customer. And that is because today, the only way to succeed is to engage increasingly powerful customers who are themselves defining price, defining terms, articulating what they want, co-creating. I could go on with buzzwords for the next 45 minutes. This is the reality of what it means to be commercial in today's marketplace. It's a 20-year business cycle, not 20 years, 50 years. The point is, it's permanent and it's going to last for quite a while, in which the most successful enterprises will reinvent themselves to systematically understand and serve increasingly powerful customers. Now, does anybody dispute this? Oh, we could call it something different. But I'm curious, show of hands. Does anybody think that we're not in the midst of a period of significant change? Good. So what does that mean? What does it mean to say that, okay, we're in the age of the customer? What's the impact of that? Digital business is the impact. Now, digital business means an enormous number of different things to a lot of different people. It's one of those terms that, as an analyst, you could ask me a complex or a difficult question, and if I answer it by putting digital business, people say, yeah, that's really smart. But digital business actually means something to me. And it's probably because I have a technology background. To me, if I do it with data, if I'm doing business with data, then it's digital. That's the fundamental dynamic, is taking existing capabilities or existing propositions and translating them into data so that they can be processed. That's what I mean by digital business. And everybody in this room has a role in making that happen, either financing how it happens, or creating how it happens, or commenting about how it is happening. But fundamentally, increasingly, we are taking things that people do and we're translating into data so that it can be processed. Ha! Gee, that's scary. So what does that mean? Well, I want to give you perhaps a quick sneak peek into what some regard as a bastion of where digital would have a hard time entering into, and that's the retail store. So an existing retail store, an existing place where customers choose to go because they want to talk to a salesperson, or it's the only option available to get some product that they want access to. So what we do, Forrester, you may not know this, Forrester fields an enormous number of surveys. By some accounts, we're the second largest fielder of surveys after the US Census Bureau. And we call that technographics data. And the technographics data is focused on, not on the demographics of people, but on the behaviors of people. And so we do all this work to find out how people's behavior is changing. And what we did is we asked a whole bunch of individuals, are you more or less likely to interact with a sales associate if they have some mobile device at their disposal that can make them, that can use other resources, and they can extend their knowledge using those other resources. And 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 5, where 4 or 5 is completely agree. And so here's what the numbers look like. If I go into a retail shop, I am more likely to interact with a sales associate and more likely to shop where sales associates have mobile devices where they can confirm what I've discovered online, where they can extend their knowledge using online resources, where perhaps they have access to tooling that allows them to simulate or configure things specifically for me. Luxury, designer clothes and accessories, large appliances, you can go down the list. These are significant numbers. I mean, if you look at that number, if you're small appliances and above, where 50% of the consumer base is more likely to do business with you if your sales associates are enabled with digital technology that will make you make your sales associates a more productive resource to those customers when they're in the store. If you're in that higher group, you're losing money if you're not doing this well. So this is not something that's going to happen at some point in time in the future. Certainly it'll accelerate. It's something that's happening right now. So this notion of incorporating digital technology and data and sensors and software, which are all the 3 forms of data, incorporating all of that into customer experiences today is what customers want. So this notion of digital is not something that's driven from the company out to the customer. Customers are expressing a preference for digital technologies because it empowers them. The notion of the age of the customer doesn't exist without the tooling of digital technology, which is making it possible for customers to search and find and discover independent of any particular brand. So digital engagement's becoming preferred, and that's what's driving this crucial need for increased digitization. Now the challenge here is that if we take a look at how businesses are prepared for these changes, we're pretty quickly disappointed by what we see. So this is just, presume that this is kind of the corner office of your typical large company. And this data comes from a very significant survey we did with Russell Reynolds, which is an executive recruiting firm. It was conducted by one of the folks who works for me, a fellow by the name of Nigel Fennick, who was up in the Boston area. And what we did is we asked executives and decision makers within firms about their preparation for digital business. And here's what we came up with. 21% of execs provide a clear vision. They set a clear vision of what it means to be digital. Only 21%. So while 50% of customers, for example, in the retail space, say that they have a pretty clear vision of what constitutes a better value proposition to them when they walk in a store, they want to see sales associates with mobile devices. Only 21% of execs in business today, across all industries, admittedly, but I can tell you the retail numbers are actually lower than that. Only 21% of execs actually are prepared to set a digital vision. That is an impedance mismatch, and it's another example of the age of the customer. Customers are actually out in front of executives. 21% have the right people, or believe they have the right people to actually define the strategy. So we have 21% of executives ready to set the strategy, but those same executives say, well, one of the problems is I only have, only 21% of them say that I have the right people to actually do this. Now, if we take a look at how that translates into business units, 15% have the skills. They believe they have the skills to actually execute on a digital strategy. 14% say they have the processes, and 19% say they have the right technology. Now, I'm telling you, or I'm showing you this data for two reasons. One is I want to heighten, really amplify this notion that customers are in fact out in front of us, that they are expressing preferences in clear and unambiguous ways, and they're demanding higher responsiveness, which is only possible through increased digitization of the mechanisms by which we engage customers, and that businesses generally are not prepared to do it, which is going to lead to an enormous amount of chaos over the next few years. But I also want to highlight this because this is opportunity for every single person in this room. When you look at these kinds of numbers, and quite frankly, having been looking at a lot of surveys for a long time, I can tell you that when you see a number like 21%, that's actually probably the high end because people give themselves the benefit of the doubt more often than not. But when you look at these numbers, you realize that businesses generally are not ready. They recognize the need for it, but they're not ready to do it. And that's our job, is to help them figure out how to do it. Ultimately, the idea of being able to configure differently, being able to evolve and integrate differently, exists not only in how we engage customers through our products and services, but also within the business itself. So these statements regarding how we're ready to deal with our customers also reflects back in on how businesses themselves are set up and ready to change. The investments that are going to be made and are being made in digital to better serve customers are also going to have an enormous impact on how the business operates inside. Today, 68% believe that the functional barriers within their business are creating problems as they try to engage customers better. And again, the only way to change that at scale is by understanding how to translate more of the resources within the business into some digital simulacrum so we can reconfigure and integrate past information more reliably, more certainly. We think that this is all going to come down to what we call systems of engagement. Now, systems of engagement is a term that's been around for a long time. Forrester adopted it and bought it inside probably around 3 or 4 years ago. And the basic idea is that we have these systems of record which execute processes. And they've been in place for a long time. And we can probably all immediately conjure an image of what a systems of record is. It has a database. All access, that database is the database of record. And we're very worried about the atomicity, the consistency, the isolation, the durability of that data. That data always has to be there. And so as a consequence, any application or any individual that hits that data, we're going to serialize it through a set of transaction processing or security mechanisms to make sure that that data never loses its integrity. That's client server. That's mainframe processing. Works very well, been around for a long time. And we've built some extremely powerful technology and created some enormously valuable assets over the last 50 years as we took process or activities, business activities that could be automated in this way and translated them into software that provided these capabilities for us. But a systems of engagement is different. System of engagement fundamentally is about touching people. And not only touching people, but touching people who touch people. And so systems of engagement has a direct path to value for a business, directly to customers, which is how we associate technology increasingly, or technology investments increasingly, with growth, profitability, market value. But they also crucially enable other employees, or those employees who in fact touch customers. That's what we mean by systems of engagement. Now, for those of you who are well-versed in technology, can you imagine having a system of engagement be serialized through a database manager? Well, a database manager might be able to handle a few thousand employees, but a few million customers? It's probably going to require a different way of thinking about the technology. And the last 10 years or so, in many respects, has been about trying to prepare us so that we could take on these increasingly complex problems of how to engage customers differently through technology. Systems of engagement fundamentally help customers decide and act in their moment of need. But they're different. They're different. System of record serves employees. Think about what an employee does. They provide stuff. They do something for someone else. They serve at the behest of the customer. They are paid. You have an implicit contract with them. So as an employee, you show up to work and you're expected to do certain things, and at the end of the day, you can go home. Which means ultimately that there is a implied coercive element to it. I don't mean coercive in a bad sense, but I mean coercive in a contractual sense. That employees provide stuff, they are paid, and therefore I can tell them what to do. And if they choose not to do what I want them to do, then they can find employment elsewhere. Now again, we're not automatons. We are individuals, and we do our own thing, and it's one of the biggest challenges facing IT forever has been that employees abandon systems. So I don't want to say that this is simple, but I do want to point out that employees provide stuff, they're paid, and they can be coerced. And the very mechanisms that we have used to create this great set of technology to serve employees as users, a lot of that just doesn't work when we're talking about customers who use stuff. They co-create. They pay. And that has an implicit contractual obligation from us to them. They can't be coerced. They must be enticed. So, for those of you who don't work within technology, I want you to think for a second of this dynamic. How many of you think that the typical technology executive or the typical CIO is ready to have a conversation where change management becomes marketing? Because fundamentally that's what we're talking about. How many of you think that the old days of doing cost recovery for large systems of record by spreading it across all heads in a corporation is going to work when we're actually dealing with customers, where we have to do a better job of not bearing everything in general administration expense, but we have to actually think about cost of sales or cost of goods sold? The mechanisms associated with the BT agenda are very, very different. So what we've done is we've defined this notion of technology management as the IT agenda, which is focused on the systems, technologies, and processes to support and transform business operations, and the BT agenda, which is about winning, serving, and retaining customers with technology. That's what Forrester says. When we say BT, that's what we mean. The application of technology to win, serve, and retain customers. Very, very different profile, very different skill set. This is why the data on that previous chart when we talked about digitization is so scary for so many executives. Is because we are in a race right now to learn how to do this. How's that going to play out? We think it's all going to start with customer experience. Now, customer experience is a term that is in some circles regarded as new, but it can be traced all the way back to software providers in the 80s and 90s who, when software projects got too big to be done in one room, they were distributed across time zones, a lot of different groups, often many contractors, and they needed to come up with a way of representing the customer or the user of the software. And the whole notion of user experience was born. And over the past 20 years, 25 years, as we've taken those same concepts to the web and marketing and engaging customers, it's blossomed into this notion of customer experience as a predicate for designing business. So we think that starting with the customer journey and understanding what the customer does to get value out of whatever it is that they buy and sell and what they do with their lives, that's going to activate an understanding of the business capabilities that actually deliver value to the customer. And it's through that understanding that we will then take the next step of, once we understand the business capabilities that activate or are activated by the customer, then we can see how that can be improved through digitization and how we can catalyze as a consequence the various changes in the system, which leads to different classes of patterns that we're all going to have to get really smart about developing over the next few years, which shapes our portfolio, shapes our leadership, and ultimately has an enormous impact on what we show back to the customer in a branded way. Tech management literally is going to become part of the brand. So when I talk about the business technology agenda, this is how it's going to play out. Increasingly, the design constraints that every technologist will use to build those new systems, integrate the systems that have to be integrated, and even shape decisions about what gets exited, what gets abandoned in the old IT space, is going to come back to how does it impact our ability to take the journey with the customer. Now, you're probably seeing where this is going as it pertains to cloud now. Why? Well, we'll get there in a second. But that leads to two big questions. The first question is, who's going to build these capabilities? Is it all going to be done by the technologist, or by the CIO, or by the CIO staff? And the second question is, and how are these capabilities going to be delivered? So, hitting the first one, the governance of these systems will be fluid, highly fluid. It's going to require a sharing, an understanding of both the problem domain space, which is, in this case, customer management, as well as the technology space. So it's going to require business people and technology people. Now, look, we all know this is not new. We've been doing this for 50 years, where sometimes, in fact, I was talking to one of my colleagues about this morning, sometimes understanding of the business problem is more important than even understanding the technology, because we can't create a program if we can't characterize the business problem in significant detail. And so if we think about this, we're going to continue to lean heavily on new discovery about what it means to do customer programs, customer processes, customer analysis, and build customer mobile apps, not just from the technology standpoint, but from the observation of how people do things as they move through space on their journey. The importance of mobility is that people move through space on their journey. Now, I want to be very clear. The next great round of innovation is going to come out of better understanding customer domains. This is where a lot of new change is going to happen, is translating what a marketer thinks they understand directly into something that can be programmed. It's going to require an enormous amount of new technology, too. Much of it already in place. But the thing that's going to be interesting for all of us over the next few years is this intersection between the two. How the two domains come together to generate understanding of how marketing platforms will be different, or e-commerce is going to be different, how we're going to handle master customer data, all these other things. This is going to be a shared set of responsibilities, because as the business becomes more digital, everyone has to participate more in the decisions associated with digital technologies. Now, I don't want to lead you to the conclusion that the CIO is going to sail off into the sunset like some folks might. I don't think that at all. In fact, I think increasingly the CIO is going to be identified as the individual who is responsible for the digital assets of the business, where those digital assets might be forged or created or even managed at a high level elsewhere in the organization. But fundamentally, they're going to have to be administered utilizing some set of mechanisms that allow for them to be integrated, reshaped, reconfigured, and delivered appropriately wherever the customer is. And that leads to the second question. How are these capabilities going to be delivered? Anybody want to guess? Through the cloud. Because at the end of the day, the cloud is the next great and perhaps maybe the penultimate statement of how we've gone from private infrastructure to public infrastructure, where we're actually moving increasingly. I mean, we used to build our own networks, and then we started using TCP/IP and the internet. And in many respects, that's what we're doing right now. We're looking at increasingly reducing the specificity of the assets that we all have to use within our businesses and using more public infrastructure or public infrastructure-like mechanisms that allow us to, very importantly, reach any customer. We don't have to administer the network for reaching any customer, any location. Only the cloud can provide us that mechanism, that capability. Any service. So if we were to have a senior engineer from Google up here to talk about internet scale computing, and which is kind of where we're all going ultimately, and there's only about 5,000 or 6,000 people on the planet that I think really understand it, and I'm not one of them. What he or she would tell you is that really what we're talking about is being able to program any data for any user with any service anywhere. And that's what the cloud promises, that the notion of the responsive enterprise allows us to conceive of engaging customers differently without the barriers associated with where they are, who they are, when they are, and what they want. Another thing that's going to become very important is we need to be able to leverage talent all over the place. Many of my CIO clients told me that they got into the cloud because, after many years of hearing that the security in the cloud was going to be such a problem, because they realized that, in fact, that there are big cloud companies that can pay more for that cloud talent than they can for cloud security. That the big cloud providers can spend more on the best security people in the world than they could ever spend. So we got to leverage the talent wherever it is, and the cloud allows us to spread the instance of that talent across a lot more places. Very importantly, we want to be able to manage investment, buy when we use, and that leads ultimately to creating options. So the tight relationship between the cloud and this responsive business is first and foremost any customer anywhere, but also the cloud creates options. We don't have to make a decision today and be locked into it for the next 10 years. We can make a decision today and then have an option to make future decisions along these lines based on whatever it is that our business wants to be able to do. All right, time for the discussion. So what I'd like to do now is invite my panelists up. So first off, I'd like to invite Jim Bartlett. And also Brendan O'Brien. And David Rhodes. So David, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce yourself and your company, and let's talk.
Okay. Yeah, I'm David Rhodes. I'm the CEO of a company local to Philadelphia called Extium, and we're a cloud infrastructure and managed service company. So we focus on mid-size enterprises who are looking to go to the cloud, and what we typically do is we, over a period of time, migrate their IT infrastructure over to our systems, which we then manage with our expertise.
Excellent. So you're one of the leverage talent guys.
That's right.
Brendan.
Hi, I'm Brendan O'Brien. I'm the chief evangelist and co-founder of ARIA Systems, also native to Philly. And by the way, shout out to my alma mater here at Penn. This is fantastic. We are one of those platforms, native cloud, that delivers that customer engagement model and very directly a monetization structure for very often providers of services who are themselves native cloud, but not necessarily. As chief evangelist, I mean, the thing that's left for me to evangelize on is a lot of the stuff that you hit on in your opening remarks, Peter. That this is the era of customer engagement. Customer engagement's inviting new business models, very specifically recurring revenue-based business models that are becoming critical to and changing the definition of what customer engagement means. It is going to the retention model, like you said, as opposed to that sort of traditional acquisition, reacquisition model. And how do you do that and do it in an agile fashion when, frankly, at the end of the day, agility is what we're talking about here today.
Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Bartlett. I'm the CIO of Bentley Systems. And Bentley, I've been there for about 26 years and started out in desktop CAD development. And since then, the field has grown into a lot of the things Tony Cleveland talked about. Now these are not just, producing drawings, but managing some of the largest infrastructure projects in the world. Our users are, building unbelievable stuff, and Bentley produces the software to not only do the engineering design of these, but collaboration amongst huge engineering teams, and then moving into the field of software for construction management, and then on to asset operations, and onto operations and maintenance at the end of this. So it becomes a very large field of technologies that are involved in our infrastructure. I've had kind of an interesting path there of starting out as a software developer in this environment, and then moving on to being a CIO as Bentley grew and needed sophisticated internal systems to run our company. And I'm now back to helping our product development organizations leverage cloud technologies as we look at how to move our users forward in these complex engineering systems.
So Brendan, let me start by saying I want to pick up on something you said, and that was this notion of cloud native. So we heard Randy talk about the blurring line between entrepreneur and employee.
Yeah.
One of the lines that remains still drawn pretty clear is the difference between an existing company and a cloud native company.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a cloud native company, and I'm going to ask everybody to say, and how does that translate into an existing company, and how an existing company goes through this process of adopting some of these cloud mechanisms?
So we're going to your cool floor plan diagram with very depressing
There you go.
Yeah. It doesn't translate easily still, I'll say that. I think that the path of translation that we see more often than not takes the form of skunkworks, frankly. Takes the form of that one sort of breakthrough, forward-thinking executive who's given the latitude by the organization to say, you know what, form your own team, build your own stack, do it your own way, and do it in service of one dedicated line of business. When we see that, and that person's able to demonstrate, and generally speaking, not generally, I would say universally speaking, we're talking about cloud technologies that are supporting that stack, right, from top to bottom. And when they do that, and they do that successfully and demonstrate to the larger enterprise, what tends to follow pretty quickly thereafter is, okay, now let's figure out how we can spread this culturally and technologically throughout the rest of the enterprise.
So it's business domain expertise dominating the initial part of the conversation, using cloud so they don't have to worry about the technology, demonstrating it, and other people learning from that experience. How about in your experience, David, as you watch companies translate initial examples into broader successes?
I think a lot of companies actually fool themselves, and I think what you've got to do if you're going to be, the difference between cloud native and taking a legacy business and transforming it into cloud typically is done through optical illusion, and it's not done from my experience and having been on both sides of this equation, been with more of a business as usual legacy company attempting to move into the digital age, but also having been in a startup environment where we had the luxury of building from scratch a true cloud native company. And cloud from a technology perspective is a deployment option, and companies, legacy companies, business as usual companies that have been in, that have a business model that works. Let's say it could be a manufacturer of whatever, some of Jim's clients, you know, they aren't going to transform their companies into, you know, a cloud business model. What they're looking to do is deploy their IT systems differently so that they can, you know, spend time running, you know, making a better product, focusing on their customers. And so, you know, what our company does is they can offload parts of their IT infrastructure that the customer does not deem, you know, valuable directly to them. They're not going to pay anybody, Bentley or Aria, a premium because they more efficiently run their SQL database on you know, XTM systems. We want to do that in the spirit of making sure that they don't have to worry about that. They want to build up a talent pool that's associated with building a better product and looking after their customers, not in an area where they're ultimately not going to acquire new customers or, you know, or get paid a premium. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. So we almost have two, I don't want to say opposing views, but you're not saying that that business folks aren't going off and using cloud to actually create or experiment or discover new ways of doing things. You're saying that in general, companies are deploying cloud
no, I think
as a way of cutting costs and cutting.
Right. I think they absolutely are. What I'm saying is that they've got to define what they're attempting to do when they move into cloud. Are they trying to transform their company into, you know, truly a cloud company, which my belief is you've almost got to strip it down, okay, and build it, you know, almost build it from scratch, or are they simply attempting to leverage the cloud with their legacy business by just leveraging cloud infrastructure and expertise?
I'll say this, and I'm going to ask you a question, Jim, about this, is that increasingly Forrester is seeing that some of the more successful cloud companies are actually marketing more to developers and the quality of different constituencies of developers and what they're looking for. And as CIO of a company that's been around for a while, how do you see this transition? Is it being driven by infrastructure folks cutting costs, developer folks trying to discover new things, business people trying to avoid technology hassles altogether, some combination of all three?
I see it as all of them, you know, and when I look at Bentley's users, I see us, you know, coming at this cloud discussion really from both sides here. In the case of what you might think of established legacy systems, we see companies who really want to approach it just in a new way, not take a radical new technology, but say, for example, to be able to operate in what I'd call the kind of the real time of a business cycle, which is when one of our users is maybe bidding on a large engineering project, they want to be able to not have to already have the software and already made their investment in infrastructure. They want to be able to know what their pricing is going to be so that they can build it into their bid on that sense. Know that when they win the bid, they'll be able to have us spin it up in a cloud instance for them quickly enough to use it in a project, right? So it operates within that business cycle. But this would be sort of traditional software but run in a cloud environment for them. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we see all kinds of opportunities to inject new technology, mostly around mobile and collaboration, which is brand new stuff that is all ground up written to be, you know, cloud applications, whether it's getting construction data or design data available to inspectors in the field who have a tablet who are looking at something on a bridge, you know, and having them enter data that goes back to the enterprise to, you know, to be incorporated into change requests for designs and so on. So it's legacy systems that are just, you know, where users just need a better way to manage those by subscription and managed services. And it's, you know, brand new mobile stuff to move into a completely new way of doing business.
We've got a couple of microphones here. Does anybody have a question for the panel? I honestly can't see you, so just say something if you do. Okay. All right, I have another question.
Are we leaving you enough time to do your song and dance act at the end of this? I was wondering what it was.
You don't want to see my song and dance act. Okay, so this is One of the things that I find especially interesting about this discussion, one of the things that I find interesting about this conversation is the idea that increasingly cloud is becoming part of the lexicon of the way, just as we talk about the age of the customer. To what degree are your clients actually starting to think of cloud as part of their branding?
Part of their branding.
Yeah, are your clients starting to talk about, we want to be the company that is more recognized as being modern or out there or more part of this new trend?
I don't see that in terms of that being an asset that's outward facing to their own customer base. I don't think customers really care, to be frank. I think you hit the nail on the head that this is the age of customer engagement. Customers want to feel like they're included in a different way than they used to be as part of the recipient of the service that people provide, and they want to feel like they're influencing that service, right? And they want to feel like the provider of that service is responsive to them. The fact that there's an underlying cloud stack underneath all of that is commodity, and I think not something that I've seen as a selling point when you're selling something. I think it's an expectation point. I mean, you guys have kids. My kids are 17 and 19, and this is just the world that they're accustomed to, right? This is just what the baseline expectation is.
I mean, I agree with that. This is a panel about enterprise, so that, from an end user, corporate perspective, I completely agree. Many of our customers, however, are independent software vendors who very much place a premium on their ability to move to the cloud in terms of a deployment option. I mean, it's impressive I've known the company Bentley for a long time, to be able to cloudify, a CAD environment is very impressive and adds a lot of value to their client. But I don't see where, corporations, enterprises are placing huge value on promoting the fact that they've moved either their internal systems or the customer-facing system to the cloud. I think it's a foregone conclusion that the market expects that.
Jim?
Yeah, I think that our users definitely see the need to show that they have real-time engineering data in the field, but they may very well market that as part of their capability, that's what they're doing, but I don't know that they would make a big deal out of calling it cloud.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But they might make a big deal about the fact that it has a greater element of digital distribution, digital engagement.
Certainly.
So one of the things that I'm fascinated by, and let me see, do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Do we want to use a microphone, or I'll repeat it if you want me to? I can hear you. So the question is, where does marketing fit in the question or in the process of adopting the cloud within the enterprise? Have I got that right? Panel.
I can absolutely answer the product marketing specifically. Subset of marketing is definitely a catalyst here for cloud adoption, maybe indirect, but the reality of the historical legacy, monolithic, if you will, on-premise systems is that they're very, very engineering focused, right? Throw enough time and money at them and you can get them to do whatever you want them to do, that's good, but it has meant that even simple product marketing exercises like shifting a product from $16.95 to $17.95 a month, or from a 2-month free trial to a 3-month free trial, those very simple kinds of product marketing decisions have now, if you're dealing with an on-premise system on the back end, become very engineering-focused tasked. And engineering-focused tasks like that are expensive and time-consuming. So when marketing gets frustrated at the 7th time that they've said, hey, here's a new way that I want to bundle this and go to market with this, and they're told, put a ticket in, wait 9 months, that often is the catalyst for change, right? And the resulting change is very often the adoption of new stacks which are invariably cloud-focused.
David?
It's a personal opinion, but I think marketing in particular as a function is at a real, we're at a real tipping point in terms of how they leverage cloud, and cloud, the definition being one-to-many marketing. And precisely, I'm talking about lead generation, and more precisely, I'm talking about the onslaught of, of email sort of campaigns. Somebody, I think it was Peter this morning, kind of sort of the content, bombing techniques that have been going on for years. I think we're at a point where something's got to change in the world of marketing and its leveraging of the cloud. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I think marketing automation, which is a cloud-delivered technology, is getting to the point where there's backlash from the recipients of that sort of content, in my personal opinion. So I'm very anxious to see, I think marketing's gone through Cloud 2.0 already, okay? I'm really anxious to see what's forthcoming in their world. And I'm honestly not sure what that is. I think it might be events like this where we're not communicating through email or through, a user interface, but we're communicating, as human beings. I think that's probably what's coming next.
How about you, Jim? Who do you find that you're spending more time talking to marketing execs within Bentley, or and are those conversations changing?
Oh yeah, absolutely right. So this is all about having more real-time information back from our users who are using the software, so that we know who's using it, we know what they're using, and we have the ability to have relevant, targeted conversations with them, that are appropriate, and not having to do sort of just, bulk messaging. It's much improved when you have when you have the connection with users.
So I also have an answer, but in the interest of not hearing me talk some more, if you want to talk to me afterwards, that'd be cool. I have one more question, as you guys, if we think about the first 50 years of the tech industry, we spent an enormous amount of time customizing stuff that provided a limited amount of competitive differentiation. You only get so much differentiation out of having a better accounting system. And we discovered that people didn't like the customization stuff, that it was expensive, it was difficult. Now we're entering into what we call at Forrester the BT agenda, which I mentioned, where we're actually talking about engaging with customers, which is exactly where the differentiation is supposed to be. And increasingly, we're talking about software that is common, as though that commonality is what we want to do. Do you see cloud and customization coming together, or are these going to be orthogonal terms? Anybody?
You go, man.
David.
I'd probably never use the word orthogonal, but I think.
Are they going to be distinct and separate?
Well, I think
not part of the same set.
It's a tough question to say, sort of yes or no. But I think from a systems perspective, we're talking about, cloud infrastructure and things like network compute storage and things of this nature. I think customization and standardization is a natural evolution of where it's going, because it's going to drive down complexity, which means cost, okay? However, I think that deploying either a product in the cloud or leveraging the cloud to manage your systems opens up the ability to spend more time with your customer and doing things like mass customization, which I believe is really where we are. I don't know if it's true customization, but certainly if you look at the consumer product market, mass customization is really, fueling a lot.
So Brendan, I'll leave the last word to you on that.
No, look, this is the age of agility, and and that means a highly competitive environment for everybody in this room. And in a competitive environment, the way that you differentiate yourself primarily from your competitors, once you have sort of commoditized core services that are very similar on the surface, is the attractiveness of the pricing and packaging, the attractiveness of your go-to-market strategy. And ultimately, that does mean something like customization. And like David, I kind of don't like that word too much. In the cloud world, we want to have it be relatively standardized, but it has to be agile enough and configurable enough to react to constantly shifting, highly competitive environments so that you can attract and engage those customers in a really fast way.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists.